Democracy and autonomy, both important concepts within liberalism. How do we understand these terms? Democracy. So I have a hard time understanding how anyone could think that the best system of laws in a society would be determined by everyone voting on it. How is that going to create any kind of order? How is that going to create any kind of stability? And how can you guarantee that the best laws are going to be generated by people, just voting for what they want, what they think is right? Everyone putting in their 2 cents? How is that? The reason why this is even proposed as a kind of good system is because of what we talked about with separation of church and state, that you don't want people to be ruled by a set of laws that they don't necessarily believe in, right? That whole first premise of the religious freedom argument. It's unjust to impose and force people to abide by laws that they don't necessarily agree with, or they don't agree with the underlying beliefs of. This is the underlying moral sentiment behind this idea of democracy, that, okay, fine, if everyone has a say in the laws, then it's not going to be unjust to impose laws. And this is coming from secular liberal thinkers like Jacques Rousseau and the social contract, okay, and others like John Locke, who are saying that this is what justifies secular rule. But as we saw, it's a completely incoherent idea. Why? Because all laws presuppose a paradigm. All laws presuppose certain beliefs, and those beliefs are going to be imposed through law on everyone, regardless of people agreeing with that. But democracy, this idea that, oh, well, we can account for that by just giving everyone a vote. But if you get everyone a vote, that's going to create chaos. That's going to create a situation where people are actually suffering because they don't know what's best for them, and they have no way of finding out what's best for them. So this is just on a basic level doesn't make sense. It's nonsensical. And think about like a group project in school. You're trying to get the best grade possible to create the best project, and you're in a group, okay, or the entire class, let's say, has to create a project. Are you going to have the worst students giving you input that will determine the direction of the project? The students who don't care about the class, the students who are completely illiterate when it comes to the material because they haven't studied, or they just don't have the intelligence to be able to get a good grade or to contribute productively for that project. It would be irrational for you, okay? But a group project is relatively low stakes in school. But what if this is the future of society? Life and death is on the line. People's lives are on the line. Okay? We only have this life before the akhirah, before death. Everyone agrees on that, whether you're Muslim or not, that after death you can't come back and have a do-over. So there are people, okay, who think that life should be dictated by what everyone, in society thinks at the moment, their personal opinions at a given moment. Does that make any sense? Don't you want your life to be dictated by what is going to be best for you and what is going to lead to the most happiness for you? And how are you going to go about finding out what is the best for you? And who is in a position to know what is best for you? Is it going to be these finite minds, as we mentioned, the finite minds of human beings, the scientists, the psychologists, who every, decade their opinions change and they discover new things that they didn't know, and they have new ideas about right and wrong and what is going to lead to human health? Or should we trust, the politicians or the political scientists, or who? Okay, who can we really trust with such weighty matters? Or should we put our reliance on the creator of human beings, who actually would know? So the other very practical critique of democracy is that it's just ruled by media. Because the population, even if you had a true democracy, which doesn't really exist in the world, what exists, for example, in the US and in Europe is representational democracy. People vote for representatives, and those representatives make the decisions. And we already know how completely corrupt all of that is and how corrupt these politicians are. They vote on the basis of their own interests 9 times out of 10, as opposed to the interests of the people, because they can be bribed, because they can what's called political lobbying, which is a nice way to say bribing. So that kind of corrupt system is the default. But let's say there's just true democracy. People are just voting on the basis of what they believe personally. Even in that system, it's going to be fraught with problems because people can easily be manipulated by mass media. And that's the case in the world today. You have this media system that feeds people what they should believe and manipulates people. And this is well documented in terms of population manipulation by people like Chomsky and others. Manufacturing Consent is the book that he wrote about exactly how the mass media manipulates the population and generates this sort of consensus on different issues. So what is the point of people voting when they're just voting on the basis of beliefs that have been implanted into them? So and then social media, that's a whole different can of worms. Social media also is more direct control about people's beliefs, because people are plugged into their phones, they're looking at their news feed, and companies like Facebook, like Twitter, have done studies. How can we manipulate the user to do what we want, to buy what we want, to think what we want, on the basis of what we allow into their news feed? So they program and engineer an algorithm that will dictate your news feed. And there was even an experiment that Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Facebook, admitted to and later apologized for, where they wanted to see, can we change the mood of a person by what we put in their newsfeed? So they can measure your reaction by how you interact with the app. And they put in certain inputs and they measure the outputs. You're just a hamster to them. You're just a science experiment to them. That's the population that they're trying to manipulate. So don't you think that they'll use that for their own interests? They'll use that kind of technology and that kind of mind control for their own benefit, but you're not going to rebel against it, and you're not going to even speak against it because you think it's a democratic system and your views are being truthfully represented and acknowledged in the wonderful, enlightened, superior West. See, they claim to have this moral high ground, but it's all smoke and mirrors and tricks. So what about the issue of autonomy? Maximizing autonomy is a universal good, or is it not a universal good? This is the question. And when we look at autonomy, what does it actually mean? It means your ability to choose. So does free choice have value in Islam? Take a second to think about that. Does free choice have value? The answer is yes. Free choice has value in Islam, and Islam gives us choice in many different matters, and the Sharia recognizes that people have certain free choices that they can make in how they live their lives. It is a value, but it has an extent. Okay, there is an extent to a person's free choice. You cannot choose to sell alcohol. You cannot choose to consume alcohol. You cannot choose to do drugs. You cannot choose to commit zina. You cannot choose to speak out against Islam. You cannot choose to preach for another, or to do proselytization for another religion other than Islam. You cannot choose many things. So your free choice is limited on the basis of what the lawgiver has commanded. Very simple. But that's the same in all philosophies. Okay? No philosophy, no ideology, no paradigm actually proposes unrestricted choice as something good. All philosophies and ideologies have limits in what you can choose. Okay? Because when you live in a secular state, there are laws that impose and restrict you from choices that you can make. And the restrictions within these secular states are actually much greater and much more expansive than the restrictions found in Islam. And there's a very easy way to recognize that. If you look at a book of fiqh without commentary, but just a book that goes through, tahara, salah, zakat, hajj, talks about marriage, divorce, inheritance, witnessing, on and on, sales, and so forth. That book is only going to be about this thick, right? It's not going to be that extensive of a book. But look at the laws that are dictating people in secular societies. How many laws are there that dictate every aspect of a person's life? If you want to see a book that is going to dictate all of these secular laws, it's not going to be this big. You have to go to a law library, and there will be hundreds of books that explicate the law. You couldn't, even if you spent a lifetime, you couldn't study and master all of these laws that are imposed on people living in secular societies. Tax law, property law, criminal law, corporate law, on and on and on. Traffic law. Okay? You can't even park your car in a certain place without the law having something to say about that. So that is an extreme amount of control because of the sheer amount of laws that are on the books within these secular societies. Comparatively, Islam and Islamic law is not even 1% of that in terms of what it requires in terms of compliance. So, this is something that we have to keep in mind if we want to do an objective comparison between how much control secularism has on its populations versus how much the Sharia imposes. You can objectively compare, but there's no philosophy that says there shouldn't be any laws on the books, and laws by their nature restrict choice. That's the whole point. And also, it's impossible. It would be impossible to have unrestricted choice, for humans to have complete autonomy. Why? Again, it goes back to what we said about rights versus duties. Every right that you have comes with duties on everyone else. So if someone has an infinite amount of rights in order to do whatever he wants, that imposes an infinite number of duties on everyone else, an infinite amount of cost on everyone else, and that's impossible. Okay, so it's impossible to even have a situation with unrestricted autonomy, unrestricted choice. So again, this is another empty, incoherent concept that we need to be aware of.